Newport, South Wales, March 2023. The city's streets looked ordinary enough, but beneath the surface, a criminal network was moving drugs on what prosecutors later described as an industrial scale. At the center of it all was 34-year-old Robert Andrews Jr., a man who turned spreadsheets and ledgers into the machinery of a multi-million-pound drug empire. For 9 months, his organized crime gang pumped 85 kilograms of cocaine and large amounts of heroin into communities, using couriers, brokers, and suppliers spread across the UK. It wasn't just the drugs that told the story. Andrews left behind meticulous records, transaction lists, cash movements, even a screenshot showing a £650,000 payment. Those notes, meant to prove his empire's strength, became the evidence that destroyed it. This wasn't a small street crew. Among Andrews' associates were figures from outside Wales, like Nathan Jones, 32, from Bolton, who supplied dozens of kilos, and courier Rahil Mirban, who delivered shipments worth hundreds of thousands. Samuel Takahashi acted as a broker, ensuring deals were brokered and cash changed hands. By the end, Gwent police had built an unshakable case, and when the sentences were handed down at Newport Crown Court, the combined total was more than 50 years in prison. In the early months of 2023, Newport was still wrestling with the same problems that had haunted many towns and cities across Britain: county lines, networks, cocaine flooding in from major ports, and organized gangs trying to dominate supply. For most residents, the damage showed itself in quiet ways. A burglary here, a family broken there. But behind those fractures sat the real drivers, wholesale suppliers who dealt in industrial quantities. One of them was Robert Andrews Jr., a 34-year-old from Newport. Prosecutors would later describe him as the head of an organized crime group that didn't dabble in low-level street dealing, but ran a wholesale operation designed to push Class A drugs across South Wales with ruthless efficiency. His crew wasn't selling grams outside nightclubs, they were shifting kilos. Between March and December 2023, Andrews' network moved an estimated 85 kilograms of cocaine into communities, along with significant amounts of heroin. The numbers alone revealed the scale. Even 1 kilo of high-purity cocaine could fetch tens of thousands. 85 kilos meant millions of pounds flowing through the group's hands in less than a year. Andrews wasn't a reckless street boss. He was methodical. He kept ledgers, records, and even screenshots of financial transfers. In one case, he requested proof of a £650,000 payment, a staggering figure that showed the reach of his suppliers and buyers. Those records, neat and businesslike, would become his greatest liability. What he saw as evidence of control became the prosecution's blueprint of his empire. Andrews also surrounded himself with trusted figures to keep the line moving. Nathan Jones, 32, from Kearsley in Bolton, became a critical supplier, providing as much as 50 kilograms of cocaine to the Newport gang. Rahil Mirban operated as a courier, making regular runs with bulk deliveries. And Samuel Takahashi acted as a broker, ensuring deals went smoothly and that the cash, sometimes in six-figure amounts, reached the right hands. To the outside world, Andrews blended into Newport life. But to investigators, he was building a network that stretched far beyond South Wales. What they didn't know at first was that his meticulous approach, the ledgers, the spreadsheets, the careful note-taking, was leaving a trail that no underworld boss could afford. By the spring of 2023, rumors were circulating through Newport's underworld. Cocaine was moving in bulk and the supply seemed endless. The market wasn't being flooded by small-time players. The flow pointed to a wholesale pipeline. That's when Gwent police began to take a closer look. The first break came not from a major sting, but from routine policing. A courier linked to Andrews' network was stopped on the road. Officers discovered 3 kilograms of cocaine, tightly wrapped, its purity tested later at around 80%. On the streets, it was worth between £69,000 and £90,000. For investigators, the seizure was a glimpse into something far bigger. Soon after, another courier was intercepted carrying £109,400 in cash. The bundles weren't wages or savings, they were part of the financial backbone that kept the conspiracy running. Each note represented another kilo sold, another shipment paid for. But it wasn't until detectives dug deeper into Andrews' finances that the true scale came into view. They found detailed lists of drug transactions, handwritten notes and ledgers kept with a precision that mirrored a legitimate business. And then came the most damning piece of evidence, a screenshot of a spreadsheet showing a single payment of £650,000 to suppliers. This wasn't the behavior of a chaotic gang. It was the hallmark of a man running his operation like a company, complete with accounts, brokers, and logistics. For the prosecution, it would later become the perfect exhibit. The numbers were too precise to dismiss, too incriminating to deny. The surveillance widened. Officers traced the movements of Andrews' associates. Nathan Jones, the Bolton supplier, was tied directly to at least 50 kilograms of cocaine delivered into South Wales. The payments to him totaled more than £1.1 million, showing the sheer volume of business passing through the gang's hands. Meanwhile, Rahil Mehrban was making his own contribution. As a courier, he delivered 25 kilograms of cocaine, shipments worth nearly £600,000. Each journey carried risk, but Mehrban played his role with consistency until investigators were ready to move. And then there was Samuel Takahashi. Less visible than the others, he acted as a broker, arranging 3.25 kilograms of cocaine transactions valued at around £90,750. His job was to keep the wheels turning, making sure the supply chain ran smoothly, the money moved quickly, and that Andrews never had to get his hands dirty. Piece by piece, Gwent police were building a jigsaw. Each seizure, each courier, each ledger entry pulled back another layer of the conspiracy. By mid-2023, it was clear this was a gang operating at the higher tiers of the UK drug trade. They weren't fighting for corners. They were wholesaling Class A drugs on an industrial scale. Andrews might have thought his meticulous records made him look professional, but in the eyes of detectives, they exposed the blueprint of his empire. The case was no longer about whispers in Newport. It was about proving, in black and white, just how deep the conspiracy went. As investigators pieced together the fragments of the conspiracy, the outlines of a nationwide supply chain began to emerge. What looked at first like a local gang in Newport was, in reality, a network that stretched well beyond South Wales. At its center was Robert Andrews Jr., directing operations, moving the product, and keeping accounts that laid bare the scale of his empire. The strength of his organization was in its structure. Nathan Jones, the Bolton supplier, was critical. From Kearsley, more than 150 miles away, he delivered wholesale cocaine in bulk. In total, prosecutors said he supplied 50 kilograms to Andrews, transactions worth more than £1.1 million. This wasn't a one-off deal. It was a partnership that kept the Newport market saturated. Supporting Jones was a cast of trusted lieutenants. Rahil Mehrban, acting as courier, transported at least 25 kilograms of cocaine. Each trip carried consignment values of hundreds of thousands of pounds. He was the physical link in the chain, ensuring that deliveries left no gaps and cash kept flowing back upstream. Samuel Takahashi operated in a different lane. Less visible than a courier, he served as a broker, orchestrating transfers of cocaine that totaled 3.25 kilograms, with an estimated value of more than £90,000. He ensured the chain between supplier and buyer never broke. For Andrews, having Takahashi meant one more layer of insulation from the risks of direct handling. But perhaps the most revealing part of Andrews' network wasn't the people. It was the paper. Police uncovered lists of transactions written out in detail, tracking who had paid, who still owed, and what amounts had been moved. This wasn't the scrawl of a small-time dealer. It was the accounting of a wholesale business. The £650,000 spreadsheet entry stood out above all. A single transfer of that size made it clear the conspiracy was turning over millions, and it was doing so with an efficiency that mirrored legitimate trade. Every successful seizure reinforced the scale. The 3 kilograms of high-purity cocaine first intercepted were only a fraction. The £109,400 in cash caught in another stop was just a snapshot. Each incident wasn't an isolated strike. It was evidence of a rhythm, a routine supply line that stretched from England into South Wales with industrial precision. For the communities on the ground, the impact was devastating. Every kilo broken down into street deals meant more lives damaged by addiction, more crime, feeding the demand, and more families living with the fallout. For Gwent police, proving that connection in court was crucial. It wasn't just about kilos and cash. It was about showing the human cost that shadowed Andrews' profits. By the end of 2023, the case file against Andrews and his associates was thick. Phone records, surveillance, ledgers, seized drugs, intercepted cash. Each piece of evidence painted the same picture, a gang operating at the upper tiers of the UK drug network, flooding South Wales with cocaine and heroin. Andrews had thought his careful notes gave him control, but in the hands of prosecutors, they became the story of his downfall. By September 2025, the investigation that began with a single courier stop had grown into a heavyweight prosecution. At Newport Crown Court, the case against Robert Andrews Jr. and his associates was laid out in painstaking detail. Prosecutors didn't need to rely on speculation. They had ledgers, spreadsheets, intercepted cash, and witnesses. Every part of the conspiracy was written down, photographed, and bagged as evidence. The jury heard how Andrews, at just 34 years old, had run his group with the discipline of a business executive. He wasn't selling street corner wraps, he was moving consignments measured in kilos. Between March and December 2023, his gang pushed 85 kilograms of cocaine into the streets of South Wales, alongside heroin supplies worth hundreds of thousands. The prosecution stressed the phrase industrial levels. This wasn't hyperbole. The figures spoke for themselves. Andrews had recorded a £650,000 payment in a spreadsheet, while cash seizures during the investigation included a £109,400 haul en route to suppliers. When police intercepted one courier with 3 kilograms of cocaine, it was just a fraction of the stockpile they estimated moved through the network. But Andrews wasn't alone. The court heard about his associates, each one playing a role in the conspiracy. Nathan Jones, 32, from Kearsley in Bolton. Described as a key supplier, he was responsible for delivering 50 kilograms of cocaine to Andrews. In exchange, he received more than £1.1 million in payments. His record showed 15 previous offenses, including cannabis supply. For his role, Jones was handed an 18-year sentence. Rahil Mirban acted as a courier, personally delivering 25 kilograms of cocaine, shipments valued at nearly £600,000. Each journey carried enormous risk, yet he continued to make run after run until he was caught. The court sentenced him to 10 years and 9 months in prison. Samuel Takahashi, a broker in the network, he handled 3.25 kilograms of cocaine worth around £90,750. He was trusted to move half-kilo packages and keep deals on track. His involvement earned him a sentence of 8 years. Robert Andrews Jr. himself, the ringleader, he pleaded guilty to conspiring to supply both cocaine and heroin. His meticulous records, which had seemed like his strength, became the prosecution's star exhibits. He was sentenced to 14 years and 8 months. One by one, the sentences came down, stacking into a combined total of more than 50 years behind bars. The judge made clear that this wasn't simply another drugs case, it was an organized conspiracy that had pumped industrial amounts of Class A drugs into communities already buckling under the weight of addiction. For the families in the public gallery, the numbers told a story of destruction. 85 kilograms of cocaine meant tens of thousands of street deals. Each wrap sold meant another addict fed, another crime committed to fund the habit, another life chipped away. The court's sentences weren't just about punishing Andrews and his associates, they were about sending a message that such large-scale conspiracies would not be tolerated. As the final judgments were read, the faces of the defendants told the story. Some were resigned, others stunned. But all of them knew the game was over. The ledgers, the couriers, the spreadsheets, everything they had built over 9 months collapsed in the dock of Newport Crown Court. When the prison doors slammed shut on Robert Andrews Jr. and his associates, the numbers looked decisive. More than 50 years of combined sentences handed down at Newport Crown Court. But for the people of South Wales, the case was more than a courtroom statistic. It was a window into the scale of the problem and the way organised crime was reshaping communities. For Gwent Police, the operation was hailed as a major success. On their official Instagram page, the force posted details of the sentencing, highlighting the work of investigators who had tracked the conspiracy for months. They pointed to the industrial scale of the operation and praised the diligence of officers who pieced together the ledgers, the spreadsheets, and the intercepted shipments. But beneath the official statements lay the deeper story. 85 kilograms of cocaine and large amounts of heroin weren't just numbers. They were the cause of burglaries, robberies, and violence across Newport and beyond. Each kilo broken down into street deals meant hundreds of users drawn deeper into addiction. Each payment, whether £109,400 in cash or a £650,000 bank transfer, represented misery converted into profit. Community leaders spoke of the damage. Neighborhoods already struggling with poverty and unemployment found themselves bearing the brunt of the supply. Police explained how industrial-level trafficking didn't just feed local demand but created it. Cheap, plentiful cocaine made its way into pubs, clubs, and housing estates, normalizing use and stretching public health services thin. The court's sentencing remarks reflected that reality. The judge made it clear that these weren't naive offenders or one-off suppliers. They were individuals operating at the top tiers of the UK drug trade. Nathan Jones from Bolton, for example, had built a career as a supplier, his prior convictions showing a steady progression from cannabis to cocaine. His 18-year sentence reflected not just his role in the conspiracy, but his refusal to turn away from organized crime. For Andrews, the irony was inescapable. His careful notes, the spreadsheets he thought proved his empire's strength, had become his downfall. In the cold light of court, they were read out as exhibits. Each line of figures telling the story of another deal, another shipment, another cash payment. What he thought of as control was, to the prosecution, an open confession. Police officers later described how unusual it was to find such detailed records in a conspiracy of this size. Most drug bosses avoided paper trails at all costs. Andrews, by contrast, seemed obsessed with documenting his success. The very records that made him feel powerful became the weapon that dismantled his operation. The message from law enforcement was clear. This case wasn't just about one gang. It was about showing how organized crime, even when it hid behind spreadsheets and business-like methods, could and would be dismantled. The 50 years of jail time were meant to echo beyond Newport, a warning to others that industrial-scale conspiracies would be met with industrial-scale justice. Yet, as one officer admitted privately, the case was also a reminder of the challenges ahead. For every gang dismantled, another was waiting to fill the gap. The demand for cocaine in Britain remained high, and networks from across the UK and Europe were ready to profit. Andrews' downfall was a victory, but it was also part of a much larger, ongoing battle. The collapse of Robert Andrews Jr.'s organization was more than the end of a 9-month conspiracy in South Wales. It was a case study in how modern organized crime operates and how it fails. From the outside, Andrews looked like a man in control. He had suppliers like Nathan Jones in Bolton, couriers such as Rehail Merbin, and brokers like Samuel Takahashi. He had payments flowing in and out, with single transfers hitting £650,000. He had meticulous ledgers documenting transactions down to the decimal. To his associates, this must have looked like strength. Proof that they were part of something bigger than a street gang. But in reality, every kilo they moved, every package of cash they counted, and every note Andrews scribbled was another link in the chain that police were quietly pulling together, 3 kilos seized from a courier, 109,400 pounds intercepted on the way to suppliers, spreadsheets showing hundreds of thousands moving in a single deal. Piece by piece, the picture formed until there was nowhere left to hide. When the sentences came down, 14 years and 8 months for Andrews, 18 years for Jones, 10 years and 9 months for Merben, and 8 years for Takahashi, the total exceeded 50 years behind bars. The judge called it what it was: an industrial-scale conspiracy that had flooded cocaine and heroin into South Wales. For Newport, it was a glimpse of the shadow economy operating in plain sight. For Gwent police, it was proof that patient investigation could unravel even the most tightly run criminal enterprise. And for those who watched from the sidelines, it was a reminder that the underworld, no matter how disciplined it appears, always breaks under pressure. Because in the end, the empire Andrews built wasn't undone by rivals or violence or betrayal. It was undone by his own obsession with records, with the numbers that made him feel powerful. His spreadsheets became his downfall, his empire reduced to evidence bags and sentencing remarks. This was the story of a gang that thought they were untouchable. But in South Wales, under the watch of Gwent police, even the most meticulous drug boss learned the hard way. There is no such thing as untouchable.